You are listening to The Art of Sales. Everyone sells every day, and this is your source for conversational, real-world sales and prospecting methods that you are comfortable using and that get results. You'll help people buy instead of pushing them into being sold. Here's your host, Art Subcheck.
How are you today? That's a question that sparks a lot of emotional discussion in my training seminars and also in online discussion groups on LinkedIn and Facebook. And that is, should you ask prospects or customers how they are at the beginning of calls? And it's really a topic that most people have an opinion on. So in today's show, we're going to look at both sides of that issue. Now, first, let's face it. People are conditioned to engage in a breaking of the ice, if you will, at the beginning of conversations, right? After all, when you meet someone face to face, we typically exchange some niceties, some small talk. We shake hands before we get down to business, right? Now, granted, it might be a throwaway phrase with words that are kind of meaningless. And the real intent here is to just kind of ease into things, diffuse any tension, ease into the conversation. And it gets the other person involved. Because if you immediately jump into your opening statement or your intentions, or worse, a presentation, it's a one-way monologue. But instead, when we use some type of breaking the ice comment or questions, regardless of whether you use the actual words, how are you today? What we're doing is we get them involved in the conversation right from the beginning. Now, with that said, many opponents feel that if you say, how are you today? It just screams out, I'm a salesperson. They argue that, and it does have merit, that asking how you are, or how they are, only signals this warning that the sales pitch is on the way, right? And during that amount of time, when somebody is asking that question, now the prospect starts thinking of, how am I going to get rid of this salesperson? So then the question is, why would we intentionally say something that's sure to create some resistance? Now, next, it can also be argued that people who use this question really don't care how you are. They say that if someone doesn't know you, they really honestly don't care. So why would you use it? Now, another reason against its use is that it can give you responses that you don't want. My friend and sales trainer and future podcast guest, Jim Demansky, came up with a name for this years ago that I always use and, of course, give him credit for. And he calls it the hate question. HAYT cleverly stands for, how are you today? And he's got some reasons for not using it. The main one being that you can get a response that you'd rather not hear. That really isn't a good way to start out the call. For example, somebody might say, you really want to know? I've got a splitting headache. Man, you wouldn't believe it. And that could be an honest answer. Not the best way to start out the call, right? And then I've had other people tell me that they tend to torture callers who use it. They play with them a little bit. And they make things up like, oh, well, just had a death in the family, and that's after I found out I lost my job today. Okay. So another reason not to use it is that, hey, prospects today in our crazy busy society want to know why you're calling pretty quickly. Let's face it. If the prospect and you don't know each other, they mostly care about why you're calling and, most importantly, what you can do for them, right? And another reason against using it is that this could put you at a huge disadvantage. I kind of mentioned this already. Anyone who's ever used how are you today and then your response was silence, what was that like? An eternity, right? It seemed like forever. Then it seems like we have to stumble and bumble over ourselves to recover. And now what the prospect has done is that they've put their hand into the sand. They've buckled down. They're in this defensive stance. And that's really not where we want someone at the beginning of a call. Now, there's not a conclusive answer or a cardinal rule here, but I do have some suggestions that I've been giving for a long time. Now, first, let me make the point that I'm going to address this primarily from the stance of using some type of icebreaker or a brief statement or a question. And it probably shouldn't be the exact words, "How are you today?" But hey, you'll be the judge, as I'm going to point out here. So here goes. I say using it or variation depends on, number one, your degree of familiarity with them. That's a tough word for me to say. So the better the relationship, the more likely it is that you're going to use it and it's going to help you, right? Because with somebody we know, we typically will have some small talk at the beginning of any conversation. Now, also, the more we can personalize this, the more meaningful it's going to be. So, for example, "Hey, Pat, it's Bill over at All Good Company. Hey, how'd that trade show go for you?" Also, their personality comes into play. You've got to read their mood and their personality pretty quickly based on how they answer the phone. Now, a cheery, upbeat greeting would likely mean that you'd have more success with this question compared to somebody who sounds very rushed when they pick up the phone. "Bob Smith here." By the way, when you reach someone's voicemail, get a feel for their tone and their personality, and then make notes about that in your CRM, and then you'll see that when you do your pre-call planning for next time. Also, regions of the country can make a difference. It's pretty widely accepted that the "how are you" or variation of it, it's going to get better reception in the southern parts of the U.S. than in the upper northeastern areas. I mean, hey, that's just the way it is. There are regional differences. Oh, your attitude also makes a huge difference. And normally this is going to be the main determining factor. I know and have seen many reps who swear by using it. They do it all the time. That's them. Their personality exudes friendliness and caring, and they can melt through any grouchy greeting and turn someone around. I mean, even the most foul-sounding people turn into civil human beings when they speak with them. You probably know someone like that. Maybe you are like that. On the other hand, you've got some people who cringe when this is even mentioned. They would never use these words. I posted this topic in my Smart Calling community on Facebook, which, by the way, you're welcome to join. I invite you and encourage you to, by the way. All you need to do is just go to your Facebook account and search for Smart Calling Community. All right, so there were several very opinionated responses there. On the don't use it side, Luke kind of joked, I'm hoping, that I would never say it, even if it meant my wife and cats had to die. That's kind of extreme. I'm not quite sure he meant all of that. Michael said, "I never use it. It is so overused today by salespeople. It instantly marks the call as a sales pitch." We had another Mike who said, "I can't imagine why anyone would think it's a good idea. That first 4 or 5 seconds is so important. You would never want to blow it with a sales call warning." And that is a great point. Rose is the owner of an office supply company, and she said, "If I hear that from a sales rep, I might tell them I'm suffering from menstrual cramps right now." Okay, that's not the position I want to be in at the beginning of a call as a salesperson. All right, so with all of that said, a few other people had some confessions. Chris said, "Yeah, I admit I use it out of habit, but I hope the person on the other end hears the sincerity in my voice." And Corey said, Out of habit, I have hate crimes. I consciously try not to use it. Hate, of course, being H-A-Y-T. And there were others in the group who adapt to the situation, and then they use it accordingly. And really, that's where I fall. Keep this in mind. The phone is more of a formal communication method than face-to-face. Because again, when we're in front of someone, there typically is a lot more small talk than when we're on the phone, which is more of a get-to-the-point medium. A face-to-face meeting that accomplishes the same objective, or a meeting that accomplishes the same objective 2 different ways, could take 2 to 5 times longer or more if it's face-to-face than over the phone. Now, the point really is, as humans, many of us are still compelled to have that traditional breaking of the ice, how's it going, easing into a conversation, both as the caller and the receiver, as opposed to barging right in. Again, different personality types. Now, if you do want to use something at the beginning of the call, but maybe you don't feel comfortable saying, "How are you today?" consider varying it up a bit. For example, "Hey, how's your Tuesday morning going so far?" Or maybe you could tell them how they're doing. For example, "Wow, sounds like you're having a great day." Quick story on this one. I was doing a smart calling prospecting training workshop for a company that sold surgical supplies. Now, they were calling right into the operating rooms at hospitals. Did you know they have phones in there? I hope they're not taking calls if I'm having a surgery. So anyway, before I do training with the company, I like to get recordings of their calls so I can understand their market, their existing process, what they're doing well, mistakes they might be making on the phone. Well, in listening to calls for my prep, several of their reps, I noticed whenever someone would pick up the phone, they'd introduce themselves and say something like, "Hey, it's Kyle at Surgical Supply." And then they would say, "Wow, you don't sound like you're doing too well." Or, "Sounds like it's been a tough morning." Or, "Hey, sounds like you're having a great day." Bottom line is, they would describe exactly what they heard. Now, my first reaction was, "You gotta be kidding me. No, you can't do that." But here was the interesting thing. They were getting people engaged. They were getting into conversations. They'd hear genuine responses like, "Oh yeah, we just had a tough case that we got out of." Or, "Yeah, I didn't get much sleep last night." Now, I'm not suggesting that technique necessarily. The jury's still out for me, but I am just reporting it, okay? Because personally, what I want to do at the beginning, I want to keep it positive. So, for example, other suggestions might be, "Hey, it's great to speak with you today." From the Smart Calling Facebook community, Joseph said he uses, "How have you been?" Now, the next one here, I'm not personally a fan of, but full disclosure, I've heard it work. So again, I'm throwing it out there. You may be able to make it work. You might feel good about this. And that is thanking them. "Hey, thanks for taking my call." People who use this say that, well, it respects the other person's time. It diffuses any possible negativity. Well, my stance for years has been that it kind of makes you sound unimportant compared to them. Like maybe you're not worthy of speaking with them. My feeling is that buyers are most comfortable buying from someone who is at their level or above, not someone who feels starstruck that they got to speak with you. But again, I've heard it used successfully, so you be the judge. Now, again, I don't have a black and white, absolute, ironclad rule, do it every time, or don't do it every time on this. And it really does depend on several factors. And mostly, it depends on you. If you're comfortable using it, do it. If you're not, obviously don't. Oh, actually, I do have a couple of rules if you do use a form of this, regardless of what words you use. And number one, very importantly, be sincere with your delivery of it. Actually, your entire opening should sound natural and sincere, like you're talking to a friend. We'll probably do an entire episode on that at some point. Actually, now I think about it, we will. We're going to talk about scripting. Let me write that one down. All right. Anyway, whatever you use here, you need to sound like you really care and you want the answer. And then when you get the answer, listen and then respond accordingly. Many people look at this as a throwaway phrase, so they totally disregard the answer. I had a prospector call, and she rushed through introduction. Hi, I'm Carla with Advanced Services. How are you today? And I slowed down a little bit, and I said, Carla, I am just doing incredibly awesome today, especially because of what I just heard. And I barely got the last word out of my mouth, and she said, I'm doing fine, thanks for asking. The reason for the call is... So, don't be a Carla. All right, bottom line, if you're comfortable using it, do it. Do try to change it up, though. Always sound sincere when you do it, and please listen to the answer and respond accordingly. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and what you do, so please, I invite you, come join us in the Smart Calling community on Facebook. You'll see discussions like these and on hundreds of other topics, plus I have a bunch of actual recorded phone calls there that I've received, lots of interaction. There's more training there every day, so go to the community and just hit the join button. All right, do you know what time it is?
You're at a B-I-N, every way you'll never feel what they say. It's the art of the sales quote of the day.
That's right, it's the quote of the day. Now, let me give you the quote first. This is so relevant today because I see people who sit back, they only do social media, they only send out emails, they don't place calls, and they hope people will be attracted to them and call them or contact them to do business. Well, if that's your only form of making sales, hoping is not an effective strategy. So here's the quote. It has long since come to my attention that people of accomplishment rarely sat back and let things happen to them. They went out and happened to things. Wow, it's pretty powerful. Now, and you might think that piece of brilliance was from someone recently, but it was Leonardo da Vinci. Yeah. So when he wasn't working on those little things like the Mona Lisa or the Last Supper or inventing things, he was referring to making phone calls instead of just doing social media. Oh, wait, well, maybe not. They didn't have phones then. Anyway, the quote again, it had long since come to my attention that people of accomplishment rarely sat back and let things happen to them. They went out and happened to things. So go out and happen to things. That's pretty cool. All right. If you're getting value from these shows, do go back. Listen to the past episodes. Those are all sales training lessons. And also, I've got a couple of favors to ask of you. Would you please let 2 colleagues or friends know who could also benefit from this show? So send them to theartofsales.com. theartofsales.com. And if you haven't already, go grab my free ebook of 501 telephone sales tips, and you can get that at smartcalling.com. smartcalling.com. All right. Thank you so much for investing your time with me. I do care how you are, and I want you to make it your best sales day ever. I'll talk to you next time. I'm Art Subcheck.